Every day, 5,000 Americans suffer head injuries. Many recover, but some have lasting impairment. Is there anything that can help? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Dr. Clark Elliott was in a traffic accident that left him with lasting balance and vision problems. He was told he'd have to learn to live with his symptoms. Although he was a professor of artificial intelligence, he was having trouble managing the complexity of his job and his family life.
We'll explore the science of neuroplasticity and cognitive restructuring that helped Dr. Elliott build new neural pathways.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Elliott tells his compelling story, The Ghost in My Brain.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy Health headlines, a study published in JAMA this week shows that Americans are taking more prescription drugs than ever. Almost 60% of adults were taking at least one prescription medication in the 2011-2012 survey year. That's a significant increase from just over 50% between 1999 and 2000. In addition, more people are taking several medicines at once. Polypharmacy, the use of at least 5 prescription medications, nearly doubled from 8% in 1999-2000 to 15% in 2011-2012. You might assume that the increased use of prescriptions is because the population is aging and older adults are more likely to have chronic conditions that require treatment. Although that may be a factor, it's not the whole story, according to the authors. There may be cultural effects at work that encourage people to accept or even embrace prescription drugs.
Perhaps a generally positive attitude toward taking prescription medications makes people accept drugs prescribed off-label. That is, treating problems for which they were not originally intended or tested. Scientists from Boston and Montreal have just published an analysis of off-label drug use in JAMA Internal Medicine. They reviewed the records of more than 46,000 primary care patients in Quebec from 2005 through 2009 to see whether they had received off-label prescriptions. They found that off-label use was 44% more likely to result in an adverse drug reaction. The higher rate of side effects was especially clear for prescriptions in which the off-label use had little scientific evidence to justify it. The researchers note that 4 out of 5 off-label prescriptions lack strong scientific evidence. Patients may want to ask whether the drug they're being offered has been approved for their condition, and if not, what research has been done to justify its use.
Soft drinks have come in for a lot of criticism over the last several years. Some experts have claimed that the obesity epidemic in the U.S. can be traced in part to America's weakness for soda. But do they really do any harm? A new study from Sweden shows that men who drank at least 2 soft drinks or sweetened juice beverages a day were 23% more likely to develop heart failure than men who did not indulge in sweet drinks. The study included 42,400 men between 45 and 79 and took 12 years to complete. There were 4,000 heart failure events, including 500 deaths during that time. The investigators suggest that sweet beverages appear to have negative metabolic effects, which might contribute to heart failure.
Does losing sleep make you grumpy? If so, you're not alone. Researchers at Johns Hopkins have found that being awakened numerous times during the night can have just as much impact on mood as being allowed to sleep only a short time. The scientists randomly assigned 62 women and men to 3 different sleep manipulations. They were awakened 8 times during the night. They were kept up way past their bedtimes, or they were allowed a normal night's sleep. The following day, they participated in psychological testing that showed both forms of sleep deprivation increased negative mood. Interruptions were especially damaging to positive emotions. People who had been repeatedly awakened had less energy, but also felt less friendly and sympathetic to others.
We've all heard that dogs are man's best friend. A new study in JAMA Pediatrics suggests that children who are exposed to dogs or farm animals early in life may be less likely to develop asthma as they age. In this cohort study, investigators tracked all children born in Sweden between January 2001 and December 2010. Over 1 million children were included in the study. Babies who had a dog in the home during their first year of life were about 13% less likely to have developed asthma by their 6th birthday. If they grew up on a farm, their odds were even better. Children exposed to farm animals early in life were only about half as likely to develop asthma as their suburban or urban counterparts. The authors conclude this information might be helpful in decision-making for families and physicians on the appropriateness and timing of early animal exposure. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Have you ever bumped your head? Did you see stars or blackout? Even if you've never lost consciousness, a blow to the head can sometimes cause unexpected and long-lasting complications.
Sometimes it can be hard to assess the impact of such an accident, whether it was due to slipping on the ice or getting rear-ended in a car. If someone still has difficulties with balance or cognitive tasks long afterwards, conventional medical wisdom holds they just have to learn to adapt to their deficits. But what if that dogma is mistaken?
To help us answer that question, we turn to Dr. Clark Elliott. He's one of the 5,000 people a day who experience a concussion in this country. He's one of the few who has recovered after sustaining apparently permanent damage. Dr. Elliott is professor of artificial intelligence at DePaul University in Chicago and author of the book The Ghost in My Brain: How a Concussion Stole My Life and How the New Science of Brain Plasticity Helped Me Get It Back.
We're also speaking with Dr. Donnelly Marcus. Her expertise is in neurocognitive restructuring. She creates instruments that maximize intelligence and catalyze creativity using clinically applied neuroscience.
In addition, we're talking with Dr. Deborah Zielinski. She's an optometrist in Chicago who bridges the gap between neuroscience research and eye care.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Clark Elliott, Dr. Donnelly Marcus, and Dr. Deborah Zielinski.
Thank you, Terry. Joe, good to be here.
It's wonderful to have this opportunity.
I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to speak with you and to speak with a greater population.
Now, it's so interesting because concussions or other brain injuries used to be underdiagnosed and probably underrecognized as a problem. But the public is more aware of the complications of concussions, I'd say largely because of football injuries. But even today, I'd say most people don't really think it could happen to them. Dr. Clark Elliott, until September 1999, you probably hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about concussions. What happened to change everything?
In 1999, I was on my way to teach an evening class at Chicago's DePaul University at the O'Hare campus, and I was rear-ended while waiting at a stoplight. I didn't think much of it at the time. I seemed okay, but even in the moment of the impact there, very strange things began happening in my life. I ignored the advice of the EMTs that came to the scene and drove on to teach my class. But I can give you an example of the things that happened to me. The police officer at the crash site wanted my insurance card, and I had 5 or 6 pieces of paper in my hand that I'd retrieved from the glove box, but I couldn't figure out how to give him my insurance card. I thought, well, this is strange, just give it to him. But I couldn't do it. When I taught class, I couldn't stand up and talk at the same time. After class, I couldn't get through the doorway. I'd have a student push me through the doorway. I couldn't make sense of the stairs to get down to the parking lot. And when I was in the parking lot, I couldn't find my car. And that began my almost decades-long odyssey with brain damage.
I found it quite interesting in reading your account that you didn't seem to realize right away that all of these very peculiar experiences you were having could be related to the bang on your head.
Terry, that's the insidious thing about concussion brain damage. is it's so hard to realize what's gone missing, because the very brain resources that allow us to recognize that something is gone are the very parts that have gone themselves. I can give you an example. This is a quite extreme example, but it is representative of the thousands of small ways that we are changed through this kind of concussion brain damage. Under brain stress, I would lose the right-hand side of my world in something that we call neglect, although in my case it was temporary. And I couldn't turn right. If I had to get into a doorway, I couldn't turn right. I would have to turn around to the left to get through the doorway. And if I were looking at a number line, I could make sense of the small numbers on the left, but not the large numbers on the right, because the right-hand side of my world was fuzzy. And yet, in the 1,200 pages of notes I took of my experiences over this decade, there is never an instance when I actually wrote down the right-hand side of my world is missing. And the reason for that is it was so far gone, I couldn't actually form the sentence that the right-hand side was gone. And many people who suffer concussion, they may say, I don't know what's wrong, I just feel funny.
Well, you know, what happens when you bang your head really hard, or in your case, you were in an accident, somebody rear-ended you, but it could just as easily be somebody falling off a bicycle, even with their helmet on. What happens inside the brain, Donnelly Marcus?
What exactly happens, I don't think anyone really knows, but things are all jumbled up, and there are so many connectors, so many neural pathways that can be affected directly or indirectly, that it makes what was habitually very simple to do very, very complex.
Now, is there like a diagnostic test? I'm sure at some point, Dr. Elliott, that you realized things were going off the tracks, that this was not normal, this is not the way you used to be, and, you know, you went to health professionals and you said, you know, diagnose me, do a test, figure out what's going on. Why is my brain scrambled?
Joe, I will tell you what the level of testing was then, and to a large degree still is now. 2 days after the crash, I was in my living room, and I knew that something was wrong. I had just been feeling so strange. And at one point in the afternoon, I said, I don't care. I'm going to figure this out. So I'm standing in my living room with sweat pouring from my forehead and determined to figure out something's wrong here. And my head is aching so much, I'm close to vomiting there. And I finally realized after 15 minutes that 5 hours earlier in the day, I put my shoes on the wrong feet, and it took me that long to figure it out. And that's what finally sent me to the hospital. But once I was there, MRI, completely normal. CT scan, completely normal. X-rays showed nothing. This is microscopic damage that we cannot test with these brain scans. And that's why often so many people are sent home from the emergency room saying, well, you look fine.
So we're talking about really a very severe head injury that it caused a lot of impairment for 8 years, for a really long time. And yet you're saying that the standard diagnostics that doctors use, the MRI, the CT scan, they did not show the damage.
That's correct. Nor did the mini mental exam at the neurologist's office. As far as the medical community was concerned at that time, I was fine. And unfortunately, I do hear now from readers all over the country and, in fact, around the world that this is still happening to so many people. Doctors are mystified. They say, well, you seem okay. Here's an ibuprofen. Could you please go home now because there's nothing we can do for you?
I think about football players. I think about kids who are playing soccer and heading the ball. I'm thinking about lacrosse players. But not just athletes. I'm also thinking about automobile accidents like Clark, where somebody says, you're fine, just go home. So I'm just wondering, you know, how many people suffer concussions each year? How common is this problem?
There are 5,000 concussions that are going to happen between this time right now and 24 hours from now in just the United States. That's 5,000 every day, and those are only the ones we know about. leaving us with, Joe, 6 million people known to be living with the long-term effects of brain trauma.
Now, as far as the concussions go, many of these people have sensitivity to light and sensitivity to sounds. And we have people constantly telling us that, my doctor said the same thing, just live with it or stay in your house and put the lights down. But when you walk out into the world, there's too many visual distractions. You can't control the light once you're outside. And what we can do, and what we did for Clark, was to lessen the stimuli. The reason that the sensitivity comes there is because the brain goes into survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, everything is hypersensitive. It would be the same concept as being plopped in the middle of a forest at night. All of your senses are heightened.
Dr. Elliott, I wonder if you might describe what it was like to have that scrambling of your visual and your auditory senses so that when people were talking to you, you couldn't make sense of what they were saying.
Although my treatment and the damage was primarily to the visual part of the brain, there is something that we need to understand about that will help these concussion symptoms make sense. And that is that we are primarily visual, spatial beings. That is at the very root of how we think about the world around us. We map these images and thoughts into visual spatial relationships and images in our brain. Thus, when we hear in the 3D space around our bodies, we also map the meaning of those things we hear into those same visual spatial shapes. So I had a great deal of difficulty with audio input. And if two people were talking, for example, what would happen would be that my visual processing of the meaning of those sounds would become overwhelmed because of the damage in my brain. And then likewise, because vision is directly correlated with the processes that keep us upright in balance, I would immediately lose my balance. So you could say, well, Elliott had a problem with balance and he had a problem with hearing, and he was nauseous and overwhelmed from input in these areas from balance and hearing, but in fact it was a visual problem.
You're listening to Dr. Clark Elliott. He's professor of artificial intelligence at DePaul University in Chicago. His fascinating book is The Ghost in My Brain, How a Concussion Stole My Life and How the Neuroscience of Brain Plasticity Helped Me Get It Back. In it, he describes how Dr. Donnelly Marcus and Dr. Deborah Zielinski helped him recover from a devastating concussion that resulted from a traffic accident.
Dr. Donnelly Marcus is a cognitive restructuring specialist, and Dr. Zielinski is a neuro-optometrist.
After the break, we'll find out what the ghost is doing in Dr. Elliott's book, The Ghost in My Brain. The beauty of brain plasticity is that even months or years later, it's not too late to get help overcoming a concussion.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
And by Squatty Potty, the original toilet footstool that creates healthy toilet posture. You can learn how squatting relaxes the colon and allows for easy, healthy elimination at squattypotty.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show, number 1012. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it on the website peoplespharmacy.com.
We have 3 guests on our show today to talk about the possibility of overcoming a serious brain injury. Dr. Clark Elliott suffered a severe concussion that led to seemingly lasting impairment on his way to teach a class in artificial intelligence at DePaul University, where he's a professor. He's written a book about his experience. The 2 specialists who helped him recover are Dr. Donnelly Marcus, who specializes in neurocognitive restructuring, and Dr. Deborah Zielinski, a neurooptometrist who uses the tools of optometry and the science of neurology to help people who've suffered head trauma.
Dr. Clark Elliott, the title of your book is The Ghost in My Brain, How a Concussion Stole My Life and How the New Science of Brain Plasticity Helped Me Get It Back. First of all, why the ghost? What was going on? And then number 2, I'd like to turn to Dr. Marcus and Dr. Zielinski to find out what really made the difference in getting Clark back.
The most common theme I hear from people writing to me, having read the book, is just the acknowledgement of this sense of having lost their feeling of being human. The person that they had always known was strangely missing, and they couldn't get him or her back again. That we are inside changed in so many small ways that it's as though the ghost of that person that we always knew is gone. And for most concussives, this appears to be gone forever. And I do have to be suspicious that it's that feeling rather than some kind of emotional disturbance that leads to the increased rate of suicide among those with concussions. That is the feeling, I'm not here anyway. It doesn't really matter whether the physical body also leaves. And that's the sense of the ghost in my brain, which in my case I was so fortunate to have return.
And the tools and the technique that I used with Clark Elliott to help him regain, the person that he was so familiar with, really, it was the tools that I had created from my work with NASA, our top scientists and engineers. Clark is highly gifted. And, of course, our scientists, engineers, physicists, and the like at NASA are highly gifted. And I was there from 1998 until 2005. So I had the opportunity to create instruments that would challenge gifted minds and also instruments that would help Clark to make some reconnections to damaged areas.
Tell us a little bit, if you can, please, about how you determined what would be the appropriate intervention for Dr. Clark Elliott.
Well, you do somewhat of a cognitive screening, and then you begin the task, and it's really a very dynamic assessment. So the brain is like the chaos theory. If you change one thing, everything else changes. And with highly gifted people, that happens very quickly. They learn faster than other people. So you can start with something very simple and explain to the participant that this is simple, but I'm just testing, for example, the metacognitive conversation in your head, the voice in your head that creates the opportunity to meet a goal and change the goal. And it has nothing to do with color or size or shape, but it has to do with your eye traveling across a number of items on a page and maintaining that voice. And so I have 18,000 instruments or more. I choose one. Most of the time, I'm pretty on target. I've been doing this for 33 years. But if I'm wrong, I always have another group of instruments to introduce to the patient.
And Dr. Marcus, were you responsible for connecting Clark Elliott with Dr. Deborah Zielinski?
I was. I take all the credit.
Okay.
I always take all the credit.
Great. And now we'll turn to Dr. Zielinski and ask, please tell us, Dr. Zielinski, how an optometrist gets involved in this amazing rehabilitation.
Well, the retina, the lining inside the eye, is an actual piece of the brain. So when you have a brain injury and then light is hitting the retina, the signals from the retina getting into the brain are affected, because if you have any functional pathways that are disrupted or out of sync, the light is affecting them. So as an optometrist, I'm actually a neuroscientist at heart, and the new neuroscience research since 2002 has discovered cells in the eye that actually link with thyroid function. And there's signals from the body coming back into the eye, turning on or turning off the peripheral awareness. So since 2002, it's been shown that the eye is really an interface. It's a two-way street between information from the outside and information from the inside of the body.
So, Dr. Clark Elliott, tell us exactly what happened. Tell us about the line drawings. Tell us about the special glasses. Tell us how this worked for you, because here you were, the ghost in your brain, and things were not working. You were disoriented. Life was a mess. You had all kinds of responsibilities at home and at work. You were barely functional, and nobody was helping you. And now along comes Dr. Marcus and Dr. Zielinski. What did they do, and how did it change your life?
Joe, this was the greatest thing. These two did give me back my life after a decade of living with terrible, terrible impairment. In the mornings at this period, I would give myself a test to see what challenges I could take on that day, and that was to name my 5 children. On good days, I could name them in 6 seconds in the usual way. On bad days, it would take me 3 minutes just to name my children, and even then I wasn't sure. I was going to lose my house, my job, custodianship of these beloved children, and become a ward of the state. That's where I was when I searched on the term brain plasticity as a result of reading Norman Doidge's book, The Brain That Changes Itself, and I found Donnelly Marcus. In a last gasp effort, we called her up, and she said, "I'm intrigued, come by. I work with people like you." And she immediately then referred me also to her colleague, the optometrist who emphasizes neurodevelopmental optometric techniques, Debbie Zielinski, here with me today. Debbie Zielinski gave me a series of very sophisticated neurooptometric tests that took, in all, I was in her office about 3 hours the first time. And she said to me, "I know what's wrong with you, and I know how to fix this." I was completely floored. She gave me brain glasses. In my case, they had prisms built into them. We bent the light to different parts of my retina, which then channeled those output signals from the retinas to healthy parts of my brain. That is, she found where the damage was. She redirected the input signals around that damaged area and through a healthy part of my brain. The idea of brain plasticity is that the brain is a general purpose device, and that healthy tissue could now take over the functionality that I had been missing for almost a decade. So she carved what we could think of as a dirt road through this healthy tissue, and then working with the paper and pencil puzzles that Donnelly Marcus gave me, we turned those dirt roads into superhighways that once again could let me be a professor of artificial intelligence. And the miracle part of this is that after a decade, I would say I was about 70% recovered after only a month.
When did you realize that something was changing?
Within that first week, my body was twisting into strange pretzels, but in a good way. I was rediscovering the world around me like a 6-month-old baby. I was dancing down the hallways at the university because I couldn't walk anymore. And I was spinning around in circles as I was rediscovering simple things like putting my key in the doorway. But it was a joyous awakening. It was just like flooding back into my psyche and my psyche returning to my body. So I knew something was happening right from that first week. And then the ghost in my brain refers to this experience of a presence I felt off my right shoulder that began following me around about 30 feet away. And after 2 weeks, it was 10 feet away. And after 3 weeks, it was getting closer. I thought, I might finally be going nuts here. But then one night outside of my office, 9:30 after teaching class, I realized, oh, that's the ghost of me returning. I'm coming home. I couldn't believe it. This was the boy that sailed around San Francisco Bay and loved math his whole life and loved music so passionately. And now that guy was coming home, and I went in my office and just had tears pouring through my eyes at this great gift that these two remarkable women had given back to me.
Dr. Zielinski, I'm sure that you probably had no idea that Dr. Clark Elliott was going to have that kind of experience from the work that you did. But what I would like to ask you is, it sounds as though the way that you set up the glasses with prisms in has to be very, very tightly individualized. This is not something that anyone can just go in and get a pair of prism glasses off the shelf, right?
Right. The whole concept of eye exams being, make your eyes see 20/20 is passé. The concept of 20/20 should be left in the 20th century. And we are now in the 21st century with a lot more information. Currently, when you have an eye exam, the doctor covers up one eye, makes you look through the other eye, and you're looking at a non-moving target on an eye chart. And you're consciously asked, can you see this? Is it blurrier? Which is better, one or two? That's a conscious level eye movement. And then they go to the other eye and ask you the same thing. And when you have your glasses, they make you see 20/20 in each eye, and those are supposed to be the best for you. In the population of people who have brain injuries, that is not sufficient. Their whole system doesn't work the same way. As I said earlier, the eye is a part of the brain, part of the central nervous system, and it's more important to put glasses on that address the non-conscious eye movements. The testing is completely different. We use testing where both eyes are open at the same time. We use testing that enhances the peripheral awareness. The most striking example that I can give is that if you're sitting around and a mouse runs and you catch the mouse out of the corner of your eye, all of a sudden your body has adrenaline in it, your muscles tighten up, your attention shifts onto the mouse, you lose what you were thinking about, and the mouse only created a shadow on the edge of your eye. So that edge of your eye is so important because people with brain injuries, they're triggered like that with a visceral reaction just from any movement, not just a mouse. Just people or things in a grocery store can trigger that kind of visceral response. And yet when they go to the eye doctor and the machine is put in front of their face, it blocks off the side of their eye. So they're not getting that edge of their eye assessed. So in Clark's case, his original pair of glasses were designed specifically to calm down the peripheral part of his eye, and we did not address the central 20/20 part.
Now, Dr. Donnelly Marcus, a lot of people who experience the kind of brain injury that Dr. Clark Elliott went through, if it persists beyond several months or even a year, they're probably going to be told, well, there's nothing more we can do for you. You're just going to have to learn to live with this condition. But what you're saying, if I understand it correctly, is that there is something that can be done. And it needs to be done, I assume, sooner rather than later.
Well, of course, it's always nice to get someone, early in any kind of healing process. But Clark, for example, was 9 years later, and I'm seeing people with injuries 20 years later. The brain is plastic and modifiable at any age. The big problem is that many people, when they sustain an injury, the good news is the brain is plastic, the bad news is the brain is plastic. They become that new person. As they see themselves differently. The people that are drawn to me for treatment usually are very high-functioning people who appreciate the person that they were before. They remember the character, the kind of life they led, the problems they solved, the surgeries they could do for hours on end, the courtroom antics that they were able to accommodate, and they want that person back. There are groups of people who, succumb to this new person that they became and sometimes forget who they were. This is very true. But the ones that I'm seeing presently all are looking for them, to return to the person that they once knew.
Dr. Marcus, I think that a lot of times people who suffer a concussion are told it'll get better on its own right away, and that may actually happen for a lot of people. But clearly there are people who suffer long-lasting impairment from a concussion. And what I hear you saying is that even after months or years, it's not too late to get an intervention that can make a difference. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have seen, I think, since Clark's book, although I've seen people before the book, since Clark's book, people who have had injuries 15 and 20 years ago.
The one 28 years ago. Yeah.
One 28 years ago that are making significant changes.
And there are so many people with so many stories because, again, it's very individualized. Everybody started out with a different brain. You have voracious readers who can no longer read, and that makes a big dent in their life. We have one man who loves fishing and hunting and moving, and all of the outside environment bothers him, so he can no longer do what he wanted to do. He was never a reader, so the lack of reading doesn't bother him, but he can't watch television because the flickering off the screen drives him nuts. He can't look at the computer, he can't go outside, he has no life.
And does he have hope that there will be able to be an intervention that can help him change that?
Yes, because for him, it was a matter of blocking off a section of his glasses so that those cells didn't get stimulated, and it made him more comfortable. There's survival mode of your body, and then there's executive functions in your mind. And your mind kind of shuts down when the body is in crisis. So if you can block off signals that are irritating to the body, then the body calms down, and then the mind can take over.
You're listening to Dr. Clark Elliott, author of The Ghost in My Brain.
We're also talking with Dr. Donnelly Marcus and Dr. Deborah Zielinski.
After the break, we'll learn what recommendations Dr. Elliott has for parents, coaches, or doctors who may be taking care of someone with a head injury.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you're enjoying this People's Pharmacy podcast, why not head over to our website where you'll find a wealth of information on medications, conditions, home remedies, and ways to keep yourself healthy. You'll find it all at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Squatty Potty, the original toilet footstool that creates healthy toilet posture. You can learn how squatting relaxes the colon and allows for easy, healthy elimination at squattypotty.com.
And by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. Website, uttercream.com.
If you would like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1012. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today we're discussing how a concussion can lead to long-lasting impairment and what can be done to aid recovery even months or years later. There are 3 million concussions that occur in this country each year, which works out to a brain injury every 16 seconds. How can people heal from their injuries?
Our guest is Dr. Clark Elliott, who suffered a concussion in a traffic accident and suffered severe impairment for years. He's a professor of artificial intelligence at DePaul University and author of The Ghost in My Brain. Also in the studio are the healthcare professionals who oversaw his recovery, Dr. Donnelly Marcus, a cognitive restructuring specialist, and Dr. Deborah Zielinski, a neuro-optometrist.
Dr. Elliott, I'd be very curious what you would like to say to parents, coaches, and perhaps even physicians who see a child who perhaps had a pretty severe hit to the head, maybe playing football, and they look in the kid's eyes, the child doesn't faint, there's no vomiting, no obvious symptoms, everything's fine. But maybe it's not so fine. So what would you like to tell those coaches, parents, and even doctors if that child begins to have some trouble 6 weeks or even 6 months down the road?
Joe, I am passionate about this subject. The first point I'd like to make is that many of these concussions are not from something that we would consider a strong hit to the head. This could easily be someone slipping on the ice. They bumped their head running into someone during a soccer game. They bumped heads. These concussions can happen from what we think of as being relatively mild impact to the head. It depends the direction and depends also the current state of the brain.
We recently had an opportunity to interview Dr. Jane McGonigal. She stood up suddenly and hit her head on a drawer and apparently experienced a concussion that left really serious impairment for her for quite a long time. So it can happen, in, as you say, in almost any situation.
Joe, I hear that over and over when people write to me. The second point I would like to make is that this brain damage is, in my understanding, always permanent. So when we have a concussion, whether we've detected it or not, that part of the brain is damaged and will not be returning. But for the most part, because our brains are designed to reconfigure themselves, we work around them and we don't notice that there's been damage because we are no longer symptomatic and we do fine. So most people will appear to recover and do recover functionally in 3 weeks. They may recover in 6 months, sometimes a year, and sometimes 2 years. They are returned to health. But that damage is still in there. And we know that because, everybody knows if you've had a concussion, you are at much greater risk from a second concussion, even if it's 2 years later or 4 years later. So once you've had a concussion, this is permanent damage. The next point I want to make is how many concussions are occurring, like in sports, like with our children, that we're not detecting. There's a fascinating study of rugby players out of New Zealand, and I have a pointer to that at the clarkelliott.com website. They took 2 seasons of about 60 rugby players, slightly less than that. And what they did was they used very simple metrics, like the King-Devick reading test. We're talking pencil and paper, very low cost, in maybe 5 minutes. They tested all of the athletes prior to the season. Then during the season, they again tested all of the athletes, not just those that they knew to have a concussion. And what they found was that for every concussion that they identified with the usual protocols, there were 5 more concussions flying under the radar. And not only did they find them, they then sent these to the regular concussion protocol and went back and identified where this happened in the game tapes. So it's irrefutable evidence in this case that for every concussion we know about, there's 5 more that we don't know about. And we can find these with cheap pencil and paper testing. And yet we're sending these children back out on those playing fields with those brain injuries that we don't know about.
There's a new company called Right Eye, and they're out of Maryland. And they've developed some things also where you could test whether a concussion exists or it had ever existed based on eye movements.
Now, what I'm wondering is, in addition to being able to detect concussions, is there something that should be done for these people who have experienced a concussion, even if it's one that's so mild that it wasn't picked up at the time?
I feel that all the patients who've experienced concussions should not only have these assessments, but should be given a pair of glasses to calm and mute the outside environment while their brain is healing. Dr. Elliott had referred to Norman Doidge's book. His second book, The Brain's Way of Healing, talks about how if your brain is allowed to, given the chance and given the right fuel and information, it can change and heal.
I would also like to add that it is very important, if we know that a concussion has taken place, that you rest, that you don't put that brain at risk. And this can be troublesome when you've got, for example, someone in the military who's being pressured to get back on duty, or college-age students who, after a week away from their team and from their studies, they're starting to go crazy. But that brain rest, I think, can be critical because the swelling in the brain also can cause secondary damage. In fact, that could even be more important than the original damage to the brain.
Well, I hear the idea that you should rest your brain, and yet I am thinking, how exactly do you do that? How do you rest a brain?
You take away the environmental stimuli. We had a high school student just the other day, and she had to miss a concert she wanted to go to. She had to miss a trip she wanted to go on because by resting this summer, she can now have the rest of her high school career as a perfect person. We have other high school students who didn't do that, and they had been had a concussion in their freshman year or sophomore year, and they're missing school. They go to school, and after 2 hours of working, their brains can't handle it. They go home and rest for 2 days, then they go back to school, and their brains can't handle it. The original rest is really important.
Well, you know, mentioning that, this brings to mind a friend of ours who suffered a serious head injury recently, and his symptoms were, you know, basically dismissed by the doctors that he went to see. The symptoms continued to get worse, so he eventually went to a specialist who helped him realize that even before the concussion, that he had suffered a couple of minor bumps to the head that he had ignored. You know, how would you help people, especially young people, teenagers and their parents, and again, teachers and coaches, raise awareness about the risks of minor falls or head bumps? Because the urge to get back into it, to get back to school, to get back in the game is so great. Sometimes the idea of rest seems almost impossible.
Well, as Dr. Elliott said, you know, the King-Devic test is excellent, the right-eye testing is excellent, and you can watch yourself get better and better so that when you get back to your baseline, you know you can return to work, return to play.
And I'd like to add that Dr. Zielinski is underselling herself a little bit, that she has some very sophisticated neurooptometric tests, and these are done by many people. You can refer to the nora.cc website for the Neurooptometric Rehabilitation Association. Is that just like we would go in and get tests for can we see 20/20 so that we can read the blackboard from the back of the room, in the same way, are we testing our peripheral vision? Are we testing all these non-image forming retinal pathways that are also critically important to us as human beings? Well, a typical optometrist won't do that, but we have very, very good empirical tests by doctors like Dr. Zielinski that can show us a great deal of data about whether someone has experienced a head injury.
It's really an imbalance issue. In other words, there's circuitry in your brain. There's chemical circuitry, muscular circuitry, and if there's an imbalance between those two, that's a problem. Then you have the non-conscious circuitry and the conscious circuitry, and if there's an imbalance between that, there's a problem. And then you just have your peripheral vision and your central eyesight. So there's many, many balances, and mathematically what you can do is angle light differently to make everything more balanced. You can do that by changing space or time, by angling a light direction, changing the amount, the intensity, or the direction of light, or you can use a filter to block off or alter the frequency of light.
Dr. Zielinski, I wonder if you could tell us how a listener who would need services like those that you offer could find someone in their area who would be able to do this specialized type of neurooptometry.
Well, there is the website, as Dr. Elliott said, www.nora.cc. However, the thing we add at the Mind-Eye Connection, we have several doctors here, including a Dr. Grace Yoon, who's learned from me auditory versus visual. I have a test that I've patented that I'm now teaching people around the United States. It's already being used in Europe. So the patients could Google neurooptometry from nora.cc. If they have any auditory issues, sometimes they might need what the Mind-Eye Connection offers. in addition. But neurooptometry is an incredible profession. Dr. Bill Padula is in Connecticut. He founded the organization. There's a Dr. Curtis Backstrom in Washington State. There's many doctors around the country that work on neurooptometric techniques.
Dr. Elliott, I suspect that there are a lot of people who have gone through something quite similar to you, where after a brain injury, things just don't seem like they used to. And yet, when they go see a health professional, they may be told that they're, kind of malingering, or they're making up symptoms so that they don't have to work. They probably then end up feeling rather isolated and as you mentioned earlier, sometimes suicidal. So what would you like to say to both the health professionals as well as the patients going through this?
Number one, you are not alone. Number two, this is real. And number three, there is hope. We are learning so much about the brain. I use the analogy that for my cognitive science classes, one human brain is roughly equivalent to 50 million desktop computers. This is a device of staggering complexity, and we are just now, coming into awareness of how its plastic nature can be used to heal itself.
Should people who have suffered concussions be considered people with disabilities? Should they have handicapped stickers and other accommodations for their disability?
That's a great question. I think that temporarily, while the brain is healing, they do have a disability, but they have the potential to be healed. So at some point, the disability should be taken away.
I will say absolutely. It would have been a godsend for me to have an actual handicap license plate. But, I'm kind of a macho guy, so there was that problem. And then on top of that is all the paperwork you have to go through. And I was told by, many doctors, this is an impairment, and that doesn't qualify. And then you have this stack of documents you can fill out if you want us to apply for such a license plate. But I'm thinking, this is a piece of paper. It has a corner. It's white. What does this mean? It was an impossible task. But many, many people, especially temporarily, that have these head injuries would greatly benefit from that help.
Dr. Elliott, did your family, did the kids, did they realize what was going on, and did they detect the change as you began to improve?
Of course, but kids are so great, as you know. They were a terrible drain on me, especially, the constant talking that I couldn't filter out of my young child. Yet at the same time, they are a reason that I had to keep going. I had no choice. I was the one that had to keep them healthy and pay for their food and their housing. And, we would travel, and I'd say to my 5-year-old son, Paul, I can't get down this jetway because of the parallel lines. Could you push me down the jetway? And he'd say, sure, Dad. And no problem for them. They just adapt. Kids are such a delight. And yet they do have to be aware of the constraints that a parent with brain damage is going to have.
We are just about out of time. I'd like to give each of you about 2 minutes to tell our listeners what they should take away from our conversation today. Let me start with you, Dr. Elliott.
As I had said before, I'd like to repeat that there is hope. In my case, I was told for years, there is nothing we can do. You have permanent brain damage. You will never get better. I was told that by every neurologist, every doctor, every rehabilitation center I ever went to. Learn to live with it. That's the best you'll ever be able to do. And I'm thinking, I can't even name my 5 children. You mean this is it? And yet I was lucky. I was lucky to find these wonderful doctors here. We know so much about brain plasticity nowadays that there is hope, and you should not give up, nor should you feel isolated, because there are 6 million people who may be sharing your experience, but we just don't talk about it.
Dr. Marcus.
Well, I think that hope is really the most powerful 4-letter word that we can use. And the brain is the most plastic organ in the body. We can change it at any age.
Dr. Zielinski.
One thing that I'd like to impart is the caretakers or the family members, they often don't believe that there's a problem because the people look normal and they can do a lot of things. So we have one in particular who says, please tell my caretaker I'm not making it up when I say I can't listen to her anymore. Because one morning the caretaker might be talking and she might listen, but the next morning she won't be able to because her body changes in and out. Your body goes through cycles. So you should watch the family members and make them understand too many sounds, too many sights, too little sleep, too much food to digest, all play a role in how they process. And when they tell you, I can't do it, they really mean can't. They don't mean won't. That happens with children and adults.
I want to thank all of you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today. Dr. Clark Elliott, Dr. Donnelly Marcus, and Dr. Deborah Zielinski.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Clark Elliott. He's professor of artificial intelligence at DePaul University in Chicago and author of the book The Ghost in My Brain: How a Concussion Stole My Life and How the New Science of Brain Plasticity Helped Me Get It Back. His website is clarkelliott.com.
Dr. Donnelly Marcus is a specialist in cognitive restructuring who practices clinically applied neuroscience. Her website is designsforstrongminds.com. And Dr. Deborah Zielinski is a neurooptometrist. There's a link to the Neuro-Optometric Rehabilitation Association website at peoplespharmacy.com.
Sophie Copeland and Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered it. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, the number is 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1012. That number, 800-732-2334, or find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you visit the site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbs, and home remedies, and you can share your own experience and thoughts about today's show. You can also sign up for our free online newsletter. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.